Hello, everyone. It's about a minute until the start time for the webinar. Again, as a reminder to folks that there is a questions box that is available to you. Please, at any point in time, post your questions on that questions box, and the presenter will do his best to answer the question during it. If not during, most likely at the end of the session. So again, we'll most likely start in about 3 minutes, so 2 minutes after the start time, just to allow people to get in. Thanks. Hey, hi, everyone. Welcome to week 5 of the DMARC Bootcamp. My name is Shazad Mirza. I'm the Global Cyber Alliance Director of Operations. So just as a quick reminder before I turn it over to the presenter for today, for the questions, if you have any questions, please post them in the questions box that is available to you in the GoToWebinar control panel. So the presenter will do his best to answer the questions during the webinar, but if we can't get to it during the webinar, we'll get to it at the end of the webinar. All right, so just remember that's where the questions should be posted. So at this point, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Matthew from 250 OK.
Great, thanks very much, and welcome to this afternoon's webinar. I'm going to go over a couple of things around reading DMARC reports, and then sort of just some options on reporting. But before we start, my name is Matthew Vernhout. I'm the Director of Privacy and Industry Relations with 250 OK. We are an email analytics company that offers a whole number of different solutions around email, including DMARC. And you can find me on Twitter at emailkarma. Before we start, and I'm sure everyone on the call knows this, and hopefully that's why you're here. Email is extremely important to the marketplace in around the world, but even more so, email marketing in North America has been a proven workhorse and really has a huge return on investment for marketers, reaching as high as 44-1, according to a recent survey from Campaign Monitor. And last year alone, accounted for $1.65 billion in sales just on Cyber Monday alone. So some pretty interesting numbers to consider when it comes to the importance of email. And hopefully part of that is why you're here, sort of to understand DMARC and understand where it has a role within your organization. And then, just a few more things to think about. DMARC is important to help combat things like phishing, spoofing, and other sort of threats against your network. And it's important to think about why we do these things. Phishing has become a huge problem. It's on the rise again. We saw a bit of a lull in 2018, according to some stats from the APWG. But in the second quarter of 2019, it's really grown again. So it's becoming something that more and more brands are being targeted by, and more consumers are also seeing the impacts of. So it certainly is something to take a look at and really consider when you're moving forward with DMARC implementation for your brands, how it's impacting your specific network, your specific domains, and your specific users. So we've continued to also see a significant rise in business email compromise attacks and things like requests for gift cards and such. So certainly number of things to sort of just background on why we're here and what's important about that. Looking back as well over the last couple of weeks, if you've attended the previous sessions, there's been sessions on SPF, Sender Policy Framework, as well as domain keys identified mail. And as part of that, if you are working with an email vendor, you're likely receiving some reporting around feedback loops or spam complaint data from consumers. It's certainly something to consider when looking at for your own network and your own domains. That type of feedback can really help identify if there are any internal network issues. So if you haven't set those up, it may be something to consider and look at as well, just as an additional tool in the arsenal of protecting your brand and protecting your infrastructure. Obviously then from there we can look at some of the more advanced tools such as DMARC, and then the latest sort of tool in the to use, BIMI, and I'm going to talk about that very briefly later on, so I'm not going to go too much detail into it right now. And then obviously all of these communications between networks, sending them over a secure channel using TLS is something else to look at implementing. It's not directly related to this, but when I think about a security channel and a security program for email and email communications, these are sort of the basic tools that I look at and really think that everyone should be implementing for their own protection and for their own users. Other things to consider and how this all plays in together revolve really around domain reputation, how your brand and how your domains are perceived by recipient ISPs or mailbox providers. So all of these types of things feed back into that. And today we're talking about just sort of two pieces. So we're talking about the authentication piece here, and we're talking about phishing detection. So that all sort of works together to help protect your brand and impacts your reputation. So sort of a holistic thought process around the different types of things that impact your email's ability to deliver appropriately to your consumer. And we all know that it's really easy, right? Analyzing data, reviewing dashboards, if you're on the marketing side, you're likely going to recognize, these types of things, how many recipients you're looking at, where they're going, devices they're looking at. But understanding the types of messages that are impacting your channel as you communicate with your users is also important. And that's really, I think, one of the powerful things with DMARC. So before we started, we were just having a conversation around sort of reporting and around looking at some of the information that you receive back and, ensuring that you are receiving these reports that we're going to talk about today, making sure that your policies are set up to receive at least aggregate reports, if not request the forensic reports as well. And just before we get into sort of the details of the XML reporting and sort of the dashboards that are available, email as a whole is rather complicated for a lot of people to understand. And this was a chart that I put together that sort of just shows the steps that a message needs to go through before it can actually deliver. So, thinking about the communication channel, is it encrypted, unencrypted, types of communication, beyond legitimate communications that are also impacting and targeting these same users as your brand and your organization. And then the different types of feedback that brand owners can incorporate into their programs and into their marketing channels, as well as into their own security channels to understand where they can identify potential vulnerabilities, potential weak points in their authentication, and take steps to incorporate that back into their programs and incorporate that back into their sort of complete loop feedback in regards to how their messages are behaving and their domain reputation. So we're going to get into reading some XML reports. There's also a number of different software solutions that help read these for you. But I always like to start with sort of a base understanding of what the reports are telling you. So if maybe you've been following along and you've set up your solutions, you've set up DMARC in a P equals none, and you've been receiving XML reports and trying to figure them out, hopefully we can sort of walk through that a bit here and help you understand what's actually happening. At the top of every report that is sent to you, so these will be sent daily, and any given day, depending on the volume of email you send and where you send it globally, you could receive anywhere from 5 to dozens, if you will, of these types of reports. And you'll start to see some information. And at the very top, you get the data of who's sending you the report. So this is just an example of a report sent to me by Google. And looking at it, they give you some high-level stuff, a place where you can go and get some support, the email address that's delivering it to you, the date range that the message is for, and just some really high-level information to help you sort of understand and track the different days for reports that you're receiving data on. The next part of the report really covers the domain that's actually being reported on. So you'll receive one of these for every domain that you publish a record for and request reports for. So if you have multiple domains, you will receive multiple different reports. And here, looking at this, so you'll see how you're requesting reports in regards to failures for authentication. So if you have a DKIM failure or a SPF failure, are you looking for a relaxed failure or a strict failure? What your current policy is, and what your subdomain policy is. So you'll notice these correspond exactly with the records that you've set up for your DMARC. So you have a P policy of reject and an SP subdomain policy of reject. And then if you are in a testing mode or you're currently moving or migrating from a none policy to a quarantine and then eventually to a reject, you'll see the percentage that you're currently asking them to apply the mail to as well. So this is a way to help you track as you move through the process. If you're maybe at 10% today and 50% next week and 75% the week after, it will show you and give you some of that information in regards to progression, just to help you see as you move along. Then you'll get into sort of really where the information and the quality part of the reporting comes in. So I've hygiened these a little bit. So where you see the IP address, that's just, I've removed the IP address that sent these messages. These were based on live messages sent, and just wanted to protect the sender a little bit by clarifying and removing their IP addresses. But you'll see here in the source IP, it would be a full IP address. You'll see the number of messages that they received for that IP address on that day, the policy. So did they have any type of disposition to them in regards to were these forwarded or not? And then did the messages pass your authentication? So looking at it, you have a SPF and DKIM pass qualification for that. And this will show up for each IP address that is in the report. So if you're using multiple IP addresses to send mail, you will see multiple copies of this that allow you to actually look and say, do I have a specific server or a specific part of my network or a vendor potentially that is having problems with authentication that should be looked at. So this gives you a lot of detail, and occasionally if you're using a reporting service and you want to look a little closer, this is where you can come in. You can sort of correlate the dates and the report and then come back and look more detailed into the reporting if you need to. And then you'll also see the actual domain that's being reported on. So the header from, so this is what domain is being evaluated in the report. From there, you'll continue to see some additional, more detailed reports around the specific authentication results. So you have a DKIM pass here with the selector, so you'll be able to see there. If you have multiple selectors that are also being used, these will be separated out and allow you to troubleshoot independently each selector. So if you're working through a upgrade of your DKIM to something that's stronger, or you've done a key rotation, this will allow you to see the different results for the different keys that you're currently using, as well as the SPF domain that's being evaluated. So if you think back to the last page, we said, you know, this is the report for example.com coming here, because this is all technically one large report. You'll see the domain is also example.com in both the DKIM and the SPF path. So you're seeing here domains in alignment, which actually really impacts how aggressive or how accurate, if you will, you can be with your DMARC reporting. So if you have domains that are out of alignment, specifically if they're out of alignment with things like DKIM, you may have some issues with mail being forwarded because SPF would fail on a forwarded message. However, DKIM may pass originally, but it would not be aligned. So anything that's forwarded could cause problems and could potentially cause delivery issues. So just being aware and understanding alignment, understanding what things look like when they're misaligned, those are things to sort of just be aware of as you move through the process, and understand that maybe a subdomain or a marketing domain based on the provider you're currently using maybe won't allow you to be as aggressive, and you need to take some additional steps before you can move those to a reject or a quarantine policy to make sure that you're alignment and that you're not impacting legitimate messaging from your organization. Where you can find mail that's unaligned. So looking here in the header, so this is a different message that was sent on a different day, and you'll see the mail from header is still example.com, but the DKIM domain is a completely different domain, which is a valid pass. That DKIM record may pass. It may be fully qualified and actually work, but it's not aligned with the from header. So the network maybe that is sending this has decided to own the DKIM record on that. And what you'll see is it still passes, so it's still being validated, and it will show you the selector again. However, if you move to the other side, you'll see that the DKIM record again, maybe it's double signed. There are certainly lots of applications that double sign, and your SPF record, as an example, is not aligned as well. So this is where you can get into a scenario by being overly aggressive with DMARC. That could potentially cause problems with delivery that are unintentional. So both of these pass their respective authentication, but with an aggressive process or an aggressive setting, you may unintentionally cause some problems. So I just pulled this out because I wanted to talk about it and really sort of think about, these are valid messages being sent that have improper alignment within the sender header. And then understanding failures. So again, we have some messages here where the IP addresses are shown, the number of messages are shown, how it's being evaluated. And you'll notice in the first set of records, DKIM is passing and SPF is passing. But if you move over and look to the right-hand side, you'll see a different IP address. You'll see that the disposition is a reject policy and that DKIM and SPF are failing, even though it's still trying to spoof the from header. So what's happening is it's looking through these messages and saying, according to the authentication solutions that are set up, according to the records that are provided, this message is not allowed. So therefore, DMARC should reject the message. So these are just things that when you're experiencing failures or experiencing problems, these are the types of things that you should look for in your reporting and in your XML messages. So if you really want to get down into that. Now, a lot of, like I said, solutions will take this information, digest it, and turn it into something that's a little easier to read than rows of XML file. And along that lines, you may start to see, depending on the services you're using, reports that look like this. So you're going to see for each domain in your policy record, you'll see what the current status is in regards to their policy for DMARC, whether SPF is enabled for that domain, the pass-fail record for DMARC and DKIM, and what you're seeing sort of here is most, if not all of the message or all of the available bars here in red. Those are going to be messages that are failing SPF. And if you see a large percentage of those, a number of different things could be happening. I know the two bars on this example that are completely red are no mail domains, so they're domains that don't send any mail. However, they have a SPF record set up to indicate that they don't send any mail, and they have a reject policy to also indicate that any mail that is sent should be considered to be invalid and should be rejected by DMARC. So that's why you see nothing but 100% red bar on line 4 and the second to bottom line. Same with the DKIM for those two. So obviously these domains don't send mail, so there's no DKIM records. And what's happening is they are showing up as not signed. So those messages would not be signed. And then that's what the orange or yellowish bars would describe in this scenario. And in this scenario, looking at this, so I've sorted based on volume of the messages, and we're showing a number of different things around the percent of mail that is currently unsigned or is currently invalid under the DKIM path, DKIM association. So we do have a question. It says, are you recommending that alignment is too aggressive to require? I'm not suggesting that. What I'm suggesting is if you do not have alignment, that you may need to take additional steps to potentially create alignment by signing with an additional domain key if you have multiple domain keys. Also, if you are able to create an SPF alignment, that is obviously the best case scenario. Being in a situation where you may not have alignment on either of your authentication records, you could reject a portion of your mail if it's not properly being authenticated. So there is going to be a number of different scenarios where a brand may have something that is maybe their organizational domain or corporate brand where they can create alignment, they know it's going to work, and they can have that as a reject. But if they're using a service provider or a ticketing system that maybe can't create alignment, maybe then you want to look at a quarantine or simply leave it in a none policy if that domain is not currently being targeted for spoofing or phishing. Moving to a reject policy is ideal for everything. However, in some situations without additional work, it may take longer, and then targeting those domains that are easier to move through the process may be something to start with. Hopefully that answers your question. If not, please ask a follow-up. when you're looking at messages that are compliant with DMARC, so these would be messages that have come through the reporting that we looked at earlier. And this is where we're seeing messages that are passing authentication directly. So it's a DKIM pass and an SPF pass. This may also, at least in our solution, when we're looking at reporting, will include messages that have had a successful authentication with an ARC report. So ARC will also then have a validation step that says the original recipient validated the message, prove that the keys were right, re-signs it with an ARC message, and then delivers it. So this is something that's very common when mail is being forwarded. And even if you look within any message that you receive at Gmail, you'll see that they ARC sign everything that they've received as well when they do their internal handoffs. So that's going to be an important piece when you're looking at a DMARC vendor, when you're working with a DMARC vendor, to understand what their terminology is when it comes to things like compliant, non-compliant, and unauthenticated. So just taking that time, having that conversation, understanding what their definitions are, because I know our definitions are slightly different in regards to compliant. So some other vendors will separate them out and say these are actual forwarded messages, not saying they're not compliant, just simply saying that they're not falling into their compliant or their approved bucket. They're just calling them out as a subset of those. So looking here, you'll see the network that is originating the message. We categorize those within our solution to help people understand the type of service that they're using. So it could be a help desk, it could be an ESP, it could be a webmail provider. Who currently owns that, or who we've identified as the owner of that network, the volume that's being sent, and the percentage of volume overall within your account. So we've seen in some situations where someone will implement DMARC within their organization, and they'll start to find categories and owners of messages being sent that could be legitimate, could be old vendors, but are still sending messages on their behalf, could be vendors that the maybe the IT team is not aware of, that was brought on board by marketing but never properly set up, but is actually sending legitimate communications for your organization. So that is one of the ways that we break these down within our solution and sort of visually represent them to our users. From a non-compliant point of view, thinking back to the report that we talked about in regards to a legitimate message, but with an improperly aligned policy, SPF, DKIM. So what we're seeing here is there was a message that was sent via a server that was not properly signed. After reviewing it, looking through it, we had a conversation with the network owner, and they had actually made some changes and taken steps to correct that action. So moving forward, this would go away, and there would be some opportunity to address this mail going forward in the future. So you will see stuff in here that is what is deemed to be legitimate communications, but maybe not compliant in regards to domain alignment, key signing, etc. That will help you really take the security of your network and your domains to that next level, and really allows you to focus on, these are going to be some of those outliers that are legitimate messages that just need to be tweaked in regards to their configuration and setup. Lastly here, looking at messages that are completely out of side of your authentication. So these are messages that are failing authentication. They're failing both SPF and DKIM. They are likely spoofed, forged communications for your messaging. And these are going to be the problem areas that you will need to address and need to identify and look at to say, where are we seeing attacks against our brand or our domain? And you may actually flip through here and see some legitimate sources as well that are completely outside of your organizational scope that need to be identified and brought in line. Maybe there is a team that has done something. Maybe there is a third-party service that you're using. With some of our clients, we've seen this in regards to things like they're using an external shipping department to manage package shipment and delivery for them. And what's happening is they're sending out notifications on behalf of the company they're doing deliveries for. But because that was not properly scoped as part of the original project, they're falling in here because they're failing all of the authentication. So this can't be ignored, and this should be monitored, and it certainly is something to look at. But these are going to be the times when you spend sort of the effort to identify vendors that maybe you didn't know that your organization was using. We also offer a summary in regards to what's changed during the reporting time period. So our default reporting time period is the last 30 days. So anything that's changing, you'll be able to see trends, you'll be able to see some additional mail sources possibly being used, and anything that's being reported as a mail source, whether it's legitimate or not, will show up here. And the number of different sources reporting mail back to you, so where your actual reports are being generated from. Being that these are really driven off some sort of personal domains, there's not a wide network of people reporting back. However, we have seen clients with several dozen reporting sources come back. So certainly interesting to look at and sort of dig into and get an understanding of where your mail is actually being sent to as well, geographically or just on a per network basis. Some trending. Trending is always important. On the left-hand side here, so reporting compliance good. This is a graph to show sort of the percentage of mail being seen on a daily basis in regards to what's actually compliant and what's not. So there are some things here it's not trying to show you like, yes, you're in 100% compliance because your DMARC is good that day. It's simply showing you that for all the mail seen that day, it was properly authenticated and tracked well. Opportunities to also look and sort based on failures to understand if there are networks or things causing problems that you need to specifically target on, allows you to narrow in and focus on those problem areas. Just a couple more examples of sort of trending that you can look at, where compliance problems are happening. Is there any regularity? And this is one I've seen also being used by brands to understand that, what happens on the 3rd of every month, because they're seeing it in a trend. Then they can go back and say, oh, well, we've got these reports that generate and we forgot they're sending out of a server we didn't maintain or a server we didn't configure. So those types of things allow you to identify if there's regular trends or if there are days when there are specific attacks happening against your brand, and sort of look at them over a longer period of time to help give you some idea of the recency, frequency, and the just the quantity, if you will, in regards to attacks happening against your network. This is also something that is important to understand. So as DMARC was originally built, it had the idea of forensic level reporting, which would allow a domain owner to receive samples, either full samples or partly redacted samples of messages that failed authentication. And what's happened over time is we've had things like GDPR come into play. We've had things such as just internal policies and internal networking issues around privacy and corporate sort of strategies around privacy that have really reduced the number of locations that are sending forensic reports. And one of the things that we've done as a way to augment that is using our spam trap network. So we have a very large spam trap network that we use to monitor compliance and monitor brand behavior. is we've taken that and found messages that are reporting to be from a brand that is within our system and identified those to act as forensic reports. So this could be legitimate messages that are failing authentication, and you can use this data to then help fix that problem. This could be phishing or spoofing messages against your brand using your domain that are failing authentication, and you can use that to help for takedown services. You can use that for identifying weaknesses in your network. And this can also be used to just have a general idea of the content that is being sent as your brand failing to deliver to consumers and being really outside of your authentication process. So certainly some interesting things here that are maybe a bit more unique as forensic reporting has become less and less available from ISPs. So I remember in 2016, Microsoft used to send these reports and then they stopped. NetEase in China used to send these and they've since stopped. And there was a few other providers that used to send these and they have also since stopped. So you're not going to typically see a lot of forensic reporting data unless you have a third-party source that is also providing you similar information around your domain. So that's DMARC reporting and how you can use those reports to understand your information, understand your domain performance and your domain reputation, and then digest that information and really sort of process it and find spots where you may have to change or make improvements to your either authentication or your network configuration to help protect your brand, your users, and your consumers. But after you've gone through that process, you then would qualify for what comes after DMARC, and that is a solution called BIMI, or the Brand Indicators for Message Identification, which, as you can see on the left-hand side of the screen, this is a live shot of the Yahoo Mail client. Currently, only Verizon Media Group is supporting BIMI, but it is coming in beta in 2020 to Google. They haven't announced a timeline for that yet, but they have agreed to look at it and release the press report about joining the Authenticators Working Group, which is the group that is managing BIMI for the community. And in order to qualify, you have to publish a BIMI record. You have to have an SVG vector graphic logo that's square, as well as you need to have a good reputation and send volume through the solutions to the various mailbox providers. So there are a number of other things that will come in the future as BIMI evolves, but just sort of if you take the effort to get through and implement DMARC, add a quarantine or a reject policy, you can see that there will then be some visual benefit to consumers that are looking at your messages in regards to how they interact with your brand and your organization. So at this point, if there are any questions, please feel free to write them in the questions box and we will do our best to answer them.
It's just a reminder again, if there's any questions that you have, please use the questions box that is available. And this is the time to ask any questions about reporting with Matthew and get any input on it.
So question here, is BIMI open or a proprietary standard? So it is being worked on by, it's an open community, bimigroup.org is the website. So it is another text record that would be published within your DNS and hosted your image somewhere, preferably on your own site, and then you should qualify as long as you meet the other conditions which you can find on the BIMI working group website. So it is open. It is the same as DKIM, SPF, and DMARC in that sense. Are there free or low-cost XML to human-readable XML services for the RUA reports? There are. I'm trying to think. I believe the Global Cyber Alliance offers a DMARC reporting solution or has a list of services that do.
Yeah, so if you go ahead and send us an email, we can send you the link to a few of them. But the thing to take into account, though, is that even those that are free or even low cost, it's pretty much the same thing that Matthew just talked about. So you still need to go through the interpretation and understanding of what those reports are. So they may be free, they give you limited access to different things, but it's just the same concept. It just puts it into human readable format.
Okay. So there's, I was set up with Postmark app for reports. It was the free reporting. It is a basic report, but it's because it's a free service. Yeah, so typically, free service is going to leave most of the interpretation up to yourself. I'm not familiar exactly with the Postmark app for DMARC reporting, but there are certainly benefit to starting off maybe with a free service. I even know there are services that offer sort of trials to start where you can then, once you pass a certain criteria or a certain level of volume, you would then potentially be charged. So there are sort of the freemium models, but I think for a lot of people, what we found is moving from a none policy to a reject policy can be rather complicated, and having someone who has done it before can certainly help you along the way in identifying potential problems, identifying potential networks. So if you're eager and would like to do it yourself, then certainly I think there's lots of opportunity there. But I think if you're looking for additional help and additional understanding and feedback from somebody who's done it before, then certainly looking to a consultant would be something I would recommend. I know it will be a simple comparison, but is BIMI similar to the lock and unlock on HTTP and HTTPS, meaning if the picture doesn't match, it will fail alignment. So currently, there is a effort within the BIMI working group to identify and publish information on how to secure and validate your logo and your image file. The first of those was an announcement made by JP Morgan Chase around receiving a certificate to validate that the logo being published is theirs. And that is something that is being considered, which then moves into publishing that certificate location within the BIMI record. So it really has, it doesn't necessarily have to do with alignment. It's a new DMARC record. The alignment would have to be on the domain ownership currently. So HTTP versus HTTPS. At this point, it's not, to my knowledge, a requirement. Obviously, HTTPS would be the preferred for any of these types of solutions, just from the added security that you get from publishing it on a secure site. But it's going to be based on the the BIMI record associated with the brand, which would then be associated with the sender. Hopefully that was clear. If not, please ask a follow-up and I'll do my best. Or I can send you a separate question or separate message privately after and give more detail. Not seeing any other questions. I am available in the Global Cyber Alliance community chat for questions there, or you can email 250OK and one of our consultants will get back to you, or you can message me on Twitter and find me there. So just wait one more minute to see if there's any more questions, and then I think we can wrap up otherwise.
Yep. So just as a reminder, folks, too, that we do have other sessions going on for the rest of these next 2 weeks. So there are other reporting sessions as well. But just also do not forget, on October 17th is the wrap-up session. So in the wrap-up session, we'll just do a very quick overview again of everything that was done over the boot camp in terms of DMARC, and then we'll talk about some other email authentication protocols as well. So BIMI, we'll talk just in a little bit about BIMI as well. So we'll talk a little bit about ARC and some other new ones that are out there that people are looking at and focusing on as well. All right, there doesn't look like to be any more questions. So in case you're looking for it, there is a questions box. Just please post there. We'll stay on for 1 more minute. And if there are no longer any questions, then we'll go ahead and close out the session.